Welcome to episode 4 of the Ingenics podcast Transformation Talks. Generally speaking, we try to talk about current topics of the manufacturing industry, how we as Ingenics are trying to solve certain issues, what kind of trends are we seeing. And so out of doing that already for 3 times now, we saw the need there to also include some external people to not just get the Ingenics opinion, but also get the manufacturer's opinion. So I'm very excited that we have Eugenia with us here today. We have known each other for 2-3 years or something like that. Work together. But maybe you introduce yourself a little bit. Who are you? Where are you from? What's your role? Things like that.
Well, thanks a lot, Sam and Ingenics team, for having me. My name is Eugenia. Like you said, I work in logistics for Mercedes-Benz for 10 years. It will be 10 years in October, believe it or not.
Wow. Long time.
Long time, yes.
Everyone in logistics takes a breath.
Yes. And the first 5 years were in Argentina, and the last 5 were here in Charleston. And during these 10 years, I developed all kinds of things: suppliers, supply chains, systems, digitalization, of course. My current role, I've been doing this for the last 2 years. I'm manager for inbound logistics. That includes basically ensuring that all the material coming for the production plant arrives on time. Mm-hmm. And to be more precise, includes packaging, material planning, inbound and outbound logistics, as well as customs. And I'm very excited to be here today. Hopefully I can bring some insights on the other side, let's say, about this very, very important topic that is digitalization, and in particular in the supply chain. Yes,
perfect. Once again, thank you for being here and making some time. And then already a senior when it comes to doing podcasts. Eugenia, this is your first podcast, right?
Yes.
So, we also just had 2 guys on here who have never done a podcast before. But Hunter, this is your 3rd one, 4th one, 5th one?
3rd one. First with video. So,
First with video?
Yeah.
Oh, look at that. All right. Then, but yeah, introduce yourself and, what you're doing. What's your background?
Sure. Thank you. My name is Hunter Price. I am a Key Account Assistant Manager for Ingenics. As well as that, I'm a senior project engineer working on projects as well. I'm from the Charleston area, born and raised. After working off in the upstate for some time, I moved back down, but I've kind of got my background in digital analytics, automations, and kind of, automating manual processes along the way.
Yeah. So we brought you home after a few years of being away. I mean, I love Charleston, but I didn't grow up here. Eugenia, you grew up in Argentina, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So it's a good mix, German, Argentinian, South Carolina or Charleston. Okay, I'll explain a little bit the topic or the title that we picked for this. So we said the purpose of this podcast is primarily to educate and to share interesting things. Yeah, this is for students. This is for professional. Potentially for managers, but we really want to keep things simple and educate and essentially share some insights from the industry. So we call this Supply Chain Explained, how real-time control towers and digitalization change the operations, or how the operations are done today. And that's why it's perfect to have someone who is responsible for the operations to talk about this. So maybe we start with that. We set a little bit the stage. Supply chain is a very broad term, can be a lot of things, can be your inbound supply chain, your outbound supply chain. To have a little bit of an example, and we'll keep it high level, but what kind of supply chain are you responsible for? What maybe goes with that when it comes to challenges and complexity?
So, supply chain is complex in every industry, but I think automotive has a little extra, let's say. I will try to explain it for anyone that doesn't know why it's like this. Basically, each vehicle or each car takes thousands of parts that comes from hundreds of suppliers in hundreds of containers, and it's touched by so many different actors, shipping companies, consolidation centers, sequencing centers. So it is really complex. In MBV and in most industries, I think we have 2 kinds of supply chains. We have the long supply chain, that is basically anything coming overseas. And then we have the short supply chain, that is anything, in our case, coming from US, Mexico, or Canada. Each of them has their own complexities. the long supply chain, I think we all have the trauma from 2020, 2021, and 2022, where the whole world could see how exposed these supply chains are. We had vessel delays, port congestion, truck shortages, container shortages, so many things. And it was really shown to the world, like I said, how risky these supply chains are.
Right.
And on top of that, they mean money invested, not only because it's expensive to move things a further distance, but also because when you have shortages or you need to expedite, you're talking about air freights, which usually are expensive. And at the same time, you need to invest capital worth of weeks of material that you have compromised on the water, in the port, etc. On the other hand, I need to say that it has some positive aspects. That is, when it's stable, like really. And it gives you a really long outlook. You're talking about weeks, which is really good for your reaction time. And I make this point here because now when I explain a little bit about short supply chain, it's important, this reaction time difference.
Yeah.
When we go to the short supply chain, of course, this has way less exposure to all the risks that I just mentioned before, right? Because you're talking about shorter distances. It's leaner, it's more efficient. This is why all the time the industries are looking towards having the material closer to the plants, right? But on the other hand, since you have less stock, the reaction time is key. You're talking about not weeks like the long supply chain. You're talking about, in the best case, a few days, and in the worst case, hours. Yep. So the reaction time is key, and I want to stress this point because this is where digitalization, for me, plays a key role, in this being able to give it information to react on time.
Okay, that's a fantastic summary. So, like you said, on the one side, everything that's nearby, everything needs to happen immediately or within the hour. So how do you manage that? And then the other thing is it's a long distance. I mean, sometimes month. But then if something happens in the middle, it also takes a long time to correct it. So yes, you know about it earlier, but then to get replacements or to fix certain things, it also takes much longer. I mean, if the facility is just next door and you say, hey, send another box or send another parts, that's something else. And calling someone in China and saying, I need this in, I don't know, 3 days or something.
Exactly.
Hunter, you are, you've done a lot of projects for us right now. You are working, you're supporting essentially a global supply chain organization. So I think we can say this, Eugenia, you are responsible here for MB Vans in Charleston, but then Hunter, you are working on a global setup, on a global supply chain and a group of different plans, right? What level of complexity does that add?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, we help with the team that's managing the supply chain for plants in the U.S. and Mexico, in South America and Europe and Africa. And the complexity comes in that you want to have a consistent vehicle and you want to have quality among all your plants. But when you have parts coming from one place and then getting split up to 5-10 different destinations, the complexity gets just more and more with having to deal with different ports in different countries, having to deal with different trucking companies, having to deal with different systems and different government policies and customs policies. And so once you go from just focusing on shoring up one of your routes and one of your supply chains from factory A to factory B, then imagine doing that for 10 different countries. So the complexity gets pretty insane, and the ability to keep up and manage everything on a daily basis gets harder and harder, which is why we're talking about what we're talking about today. Yeah,
exactly. I think that's a good introduction into the topic of what's used today, what's done today, what is needed, and then maybe later on an outlook of what would be great to have. So when it comes to you have a team supporting you, managing your supply chain. In this world, there's always talk about proactive versus reactive. Maybe in a general statement, how are you and how is your team managing the supply chain at the moment? How do they, if they find an issue, how do they go after it? Are they already certain tools that are being used, or is the work more manual? I think that's important to understand where things need to go, or kind of what's needed in this space.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. I like to say that in logistics, at least my team, we manage the exceptions because, as I said, thousands of parts, you cannot check one by one. So we use digitalization, the way that we have developed so far, in order to look for the exceptions in a standard way and in a fast way. What we do, I try to be as proactive as possible. For me, it's very clear. My customer is production, and I need to deliver to them the parts on time, what they need to produce. The way to be proactive is we have a daily shop floor, right? My team, we have 15 KPIs, I believe, that we check daily, where each of my team members explain their exceptions, right? And it includes checking the material, the stock levels in the just-in-sequence suppliers. I think this is important because you guys from Ingenics help us with that at some point. We check the container management, not only in terms of delivery, but also in terms of aging because of the cost. And we try to be proactive. We have around 7 dashboards, I believe, where we manage our shop floor, these 15 KPIs, and we are able to, in 15 minutes, analyze where are we standing every day, what do we foresee for the plant in the next couple of days in order to deliver to our customer.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing, having data or getting the data is not necessarily the problem. Like there's lots of data within of course Mercedes, but then also within the supply chain. So that is not the problem. The question is, essentially getting it condensed from, like you said, your thousands of parts to, okay, those are the 5 part numbers I need to look at. Hunter, what are the, and Eugenia, you already mentioned a few of them, what are the things that are kind of standard when it comes to digital solution, kind of common, something from the last 2 to 3 years that everyone should have at this point?
Yeah, let's say in terms of the short supply chain, I would say something for sure is this, just, at least in the automotive and maybe any other kind of high volume manufacturing, is this just in sequence or just in time delivery monitors. So something that, with these short supply chains, these are, for those that don't know, these just in time vehicles, they are literally, the parts are ordered for them sometimes that morning or several hours before. And so when there's a disruption between several hours before and when that vehicle needs to start on the assembly line, it's a firefight to get something going. So having a real-time, which is key, real-time monitor to be able to make instant reactions and to disruptions in the supply chain is, as I think, critical, at least in the short-term supply chain. And in the long term, one thing you'll see is a lot of, like you mentioned, there's a lot of systems that you can use for inventory, for production, for supply or logistics, for your trucking or your ocean truck carrier, and then there's weather, there's traffic. So there's so many different data things to look at. So when you need to solve an issue of, hey, we're running short on this part, your logistics specialist is going to need to check this system, and then, okay, now let me check this system over here. Okay, now let me check how long it'll take to get there. Let me see how much stock we have currently. So there's so many different places to check when you're just trying to solve one question. So for those long-term supply chains, having, like you would say, a control tower somewhere where you can see your vessels, see your inventories is kind of, I think, key to be able to manage something like that.
Yeah. So it's not like digitalization is the new thing and we need to start this. No, I mean, this has started for many years. There's many great systems. You already mentioned it. Also, the transportation carriers have their own systems, the vessel carriers, there's lots of systems. Yeah. And again, lots of data out there. The question is a little bit, how do you bring that all together? So the topic for me is not digitalization, yes or no, or starting it, but it's taking it to the next level.
Yeah.
So I think we clarified a little bit the need for digitalization to, in the short term, be able to react fast, and in the long term, identify deviations relatively quick. You already mentioned the term control tower. Mm-hmm. And now we're getting a little bit nerdy, I think, but like, what is that trying to do, and what's really the ultimate goal here?
Yeah, what it's trying to do is give you one spot for all of your key information that would help you drive the business. Logistics would have something different than the quality manager would, or their engineering, but it's trying to take away that looking and let me check, like I said earlier, the shipping company, let me check the trucking company. It's trying to get rid of all those extra steps to get to have all your answers or all your information in one spot. And the overall goal would be to give back your specialists the time to make decisions that they were hired to make versus them running reports or opening Excel files. Where did I save it, in this location or that location? So yeah, the goal is to have everything in one spot for quicker, faster decision making.
And I think you have something like this or something that's trying to do this, right? And so that's kind of where you're going towards, is that right?
Yes, we are running our production in 3 shifts. We start Sunday night and finish Friday night. So clearly we need to have a kind of 24/7 control. And this is where the control tower comes in place. One of the things that they check is exactly the just-in-sequence deliveries. They check the containers that need to be unloaded, all sorts of things. The challenge that I have seen also in my last years is many times combining all the data that you mentioned, Samuel, right? Because yes, everything is available. You can go now and look at a container and know exactly where it is. Yeah. And you can go now in my system and see which part is exactly inside the container. And you can see the stock levels. Yes, all you can see, but putting all that together sometimes is the challenging part. In our case, what we have is, like I mentioned, the control tower with not only the deliveries, but also the production status live. So at all times, the control tower is looking at how our buffers are looking, what is the output from the different shops, how is the outlook for the next few hours. All that is live right now, and it's key to steer our business.
Focus is on big picture thinking, not just isolated, okay, this part is late. It might be late, but I still have enough stock, so it's not a problem. Or it might be late, but production is canceled or behind, so it's not a problem. So big picture thinking. So Hunter, we called this session Supply Chain Explained. And so you used these terms a few times with me, and I had to slow you down. So maybe you can explain 2 terms for us. And one would be the web scraping, and the other one would be the digital twin in the supply chain. So maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Give it a shot. Yeah. So I'll start with the web scraping. With that, it's the key with web scraping is first and foremost, in terms of being ethical, making sure it's your data, or at least the data that somebody else is providing you about your business in order to do this web scraping process. But in general, it's kind of a quick and dirty way to pull data from a website without having to go to the website itself. Say, for instance, one of the ones I see most often used is trucking or shipping companies tracking information. So say you have all of these tracking IDs or booking numbers or bills of lading, and you have in a larger company maybe several hundred a day. And in order to track and make sure each of those is on time, one by one, in these websites, it takes quite some time. You have to search literally one by one. So what web scraping can help do is, on a schedule, on an automated, say at 7 a.m. every day, this Python, the coding language Python, this Python robot will fire up and then instantly run through that website on its own, all of your list, all of your ID numbers, and then pull out the information you want, like the time of delivery to port A, time of delivery to port B. So you're able to get all of this information and maybe in a way that the shipping company might not be able to do yet. Maybe you're using a smaller shipping company that doesn't have a API key that you can connect into. So if they have a website, you can usually pull that information you need without having to have, I guess, an intern 8 hours a day searching bills of lading.
Okay, so that's web scraping. Essentially, instead of a person manually looking for information, it's a process automation. And then we've been debating that term a little bit because it's, I would say that one is pretty new. So a digital twin, that term is not new, but it's mostly used when it comes to production facilities or manufacturing facilities. And now, this is a little bit drifting over to the supply chain, and it goes together with real-time information, having access to different websites, your internal reports, API connections to companies that have that. So what would be the goal of a digital twin when it comes to the supply chain?
I would say the goal, you have your control tower where everything's in one spot. So that's key for sure. But the digital twin, where that comes into play, is it's a virtual representation of your physical supply chain. So you would have your ports laid out on there. You would have your consolidation centers, your plants of delivery. And what the digital twin could help you do is to then predict or to simulate. So that's something the control tower might not give you the power to do. So once you have that control tower set up, this digital twin, say for a short-term supply chain, you could start simulating things like, okay, what if I added an extra route in for this supplier? Or what if I added extra trucks onto this route? Anything that you could think of with the logistics sides of things, with a solid digital twin, you can simulate it instead of, semi-simulating it with Excel or with, estimated numbers. You're using historical data that you've loaded in, a year or two at least, and you're predicting, or basically not predicting, but more or less showing what could happen if you do these different changes.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Too good.
Really very, very good.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, I think we are transparent about this. This is something that's being developed. We have not found a solution that provides all of that. That leads me a little bit into the next topic. We always talk about outlook, what's in the future. Again, maybe high level. What are some of the things that you would be, in the end, you can also wish for things. What are the things maybe you have things that need to be solved, and maybe you have things where like, hey, this would be fantastic to automate this. What are some of the things that would make your life so much easier?
Well, I have many wishes, yes. Many things that I would like.
Yeah.
But I think thinking in more urgent things, this connection with other vendors, suppliers, this for sure, in my opinion, needs to be strengthened, right? I would like to see at all times what are my suppliers doing, what is their production system, their buffer, not only what they are sending me, which is also important, but also a little bit more. Because like we discussed already, it's immediate, the impact. So you have to really be prepared. And I hate when I have to tell my customer in 2 hours I will have to stop you. How can we avoid that? This is for me super important. Another thing that is very important, and I wrote it down, is good, Hunter, you mentioned it, is this predicting, right? Because supply chain, I mentioned, has a lot of factors coming into play. So I would love to have a really easy tool to say, okay, if the ocean now suffers a delay of 2 days for each vessel, what is the impact in every aspect of my supply chain, right? And sometimes to have that whole picture, it's complex because there are a lot of factors coming into place. This is the things that I see as more urgent. Looking as maybe nice to have, I feel that in the training and in the assistance to the planners, in my case, I would love to use a little bit more of technology. For instance, I would like to have a virtual assistant that is helping my team in doing the tasks that they are doing, maybe even contacting the supplier, helping them making their work easier, right? And another thing that I wrote down, I think it's important, I don't know if you guys probably are familiar with the term pokayoki. We industrial engineers love that term, but it's basically a process that is pallet-proof, that you cannot make a mistake. And I would love to have that more in my processes, because we have become really, really good in identifying the exceptions and identifying the mistakes and fixing them, but what about preventing them? And this is something that for sure I would like to see more in the future.
That's very good. Yeah, Pokayoka is, I think, very established when it comes to your assembly. Yeah, don't pick the wrong screw, because there, if you have an issue, 5 stations down, then it's rework or it's downtime. But in even in logistics, when you're talking about supermarkets, don't pick the wrong part and put it on the sequence rack. Even there, it's very established, but on the supply chain, it's a little bit less.
I mean, it's very sensitive, right? If you set up the wrong safety stock desired of a part because you put an extra 0, all of a sudden you have 100 days on hand and not 10 days on hand. Yeah. It's a simple mistake, but it has a big impact.
Yeah, I mean, on that one, my favorite example is, my background is logistics planning. So we planned a warehouse with certain days on hand or safety stock. Yeah, so Europe, I don't know, 14 days, Mexico 5 days, US 3 days, and then just half a day or whatever. And then comes to launch, and the material planner, they just plug in their numbers, them falling out of the sky, or, that supplier gives me issues, so I'll just double it up. And if everyone does this, then you're sitting there with a warehouse busting out of the seams, and everyone's like looking at planning like you planned the warehouse the wrong way. So
let the record be clear. We do not do that in my team.
No, it was a different company. That was not Mercedes. That was my first launch, and I still have some scars from that. But anyways, Hunter, I mean, the things that Eugenia mentioned that she is hoping for, is maybe even working on, are some of the things something that you're already working on? Yeah,
I mean, definitely I would say you mentioned a good point about knowing what your suppliers were doing and how their production's going. That's something that I have seen before, starting to come up more and more, is not just a digital twin of, my factory, but a digital twin of my supplier or my customer's factory, so that, yeah, I can predict all of my fluctuations or all of my, robot down times, but I'm constantly reacting to how the supplier or how my customer is, whether selling or providing me parts. So if I can have a digital twin of their facility and say, I'm crushing this assembly line, I'm producing way more, but, we could definitely have more output. What if I turned them up a little notch? What if I increased their jobs per hour? Would we still be able to support? You could start to simulate things like that, and even have, we haven't talked about it too much, but with these digital twins, you can start incorporating, weather and traffic patterns into it, so that I have seen this, is that if, say, for a short supply chain, you have all these truck routes within the same state or whatever. If you have a major interstate shutdown, that's going to affect some of your just-in-sequence or just-in-time parts for several hours. With these digital twins, people are able to see a quick, on a screen, a red line or all these like red deliveries hours ahead of time and react to them versus, reacting after the fact that they're stuck in traffic. Because, I mean, that's what it gives you. It could even say, next week there's terrible weather coming in. Here are some shipments to look out for or to maybe try to react with. So, yeah, I see that already out there in the industry and with different, whether it be automotive or aerospace or medical technologies. Everybody's trying to use some digital twin aspect in their supply chain. Yeah,
so maybe that term is becoming more and more popular, and not just us using it. So very good insight. One last question before we're kind of moving a little bit to the key messages. One thing that's kind of not a buzzword, but something that's asked a lot or used a lot is the topic nearshoring. With kind of, I think you called it the scars from COVID. Everyone's still under the impression of it. The trauma, not scars, right? Is this a topic that's actually happening, or in a global setup? Is something that's not really being changed? Are we moving a little bit away from globalization and focusing on localization, or how are you seeing things?
I mean, I don't think this is something that affects only Mercedes-Benz, but even if you turn on the news, right? Yeah. What is going on with, for instance, the government and the possible duties and controls for China material? So, this is, I think it's coming. It's not only a topic of the supply chain. Sometimes it's also about global factors, right, that come in place. So for me, it's pretty clear that every company is looking into getting their suppliers closer and closer.
Yeah, very, very good topic. It's kind of the framework that you're dealing with, not just performance of suppliers, but, what's the setup here in the US? What's the setup in Europe? How is China acting and things like that? So thank you for that insight. Typically I wrap things up with, giving everyone the chance to, spell out a key takeaway. So for everyone who still made it up until this point, listening 30 minutes for us, what would be a message or a summary out of this conversation that you would like to share?
I would say, I mean, I'm biased with data here, but the key message is that, like you said earlier, data is not hard to come by nowadays, especially with, fast reacting operations like a short-term supply chain. Knowing how to use your data is paramount nowadays. If you were to move all your suppliers closer to you, you are going to have to rely more and more on real-time data because you're going to have to react so much faster in everyday operations. So I think that the key message in terms of data is getting your company or your facility set up so that you have all the information you need and you have it in one place. And from there, once you just get it all into one place, the world is your oyster. You can predict, you can simulate, you can do all these other things, but first and foremost, understand what data you have.
Okay. Eugenia?
From my side, key message, supply chain is complex. I think it will not get easier, most likely harder.
Yep.
So like you said, digitalization, yes or no, is not a discussion anymore. How do we use it even more that our people are focusing decision-making and adding value and really not spending any time in activities that can be easily done by a digital solution?
Yeah, very good. I couldn't agree more. And I like the phrase you used, the world is your oyster. Yeah, fitting to the Charleston environment. So thank you very much for joining today. It was a pleasure to hear both perspectives, one on the manufacturing side and also the managerial side, kind of the things that keep you up at night. And then Hunter, on your side, your technical expertise and explaining some of the terms. So thank you for joining, and I hope we can do this soon again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.